Feedback loops. In the last video, we talked about homeostasis and about homeostatic mechanisms that bring various parameters in the body back to its set point. All those homeostatic mechanisms are negative feedback loops. So there is going to be a sensor that is going to detect that some parameter has gone away from the set point. Then there's going to be an integration of that information. uh, Sensory, nervous, circadian, and endocrine systems are going to work together in determining what to do and then signaling to the appropriate organ systems to do something about it to bring that parameter back to the set point. So sensors are giving that information to the integrators, central nervous system, which may use hormones, consulting with the circadian clock to make sure that to know which is the proper set point for that time of day, and then that integrator is going to send instructions to the the effectors. The effector organs may be muscles, maybe glands, maybe all sorts of other things, whatever is going to do to work on bringing that parameter back to the set point. So almost everything in our body works as a negative feedback loop. Almost all the physiology is a physiology of negative feedback loops. When a body needs to secrete a hormone to do something, it immediately also starts bringing that hormone back down to its normal levels. So as soon as the body increases a level of the hormone, immediately triggers all the homeostatic mechanisms that are going to bring that hormone back to its baseline level, to its set point. So that is the most common way a body does all of its functions. So if an event of some kind of internal or external environment changes some parameter, it is going to be detected by a sensor. The decision is going to be made by an integrator, which is going to tell the effector to get the job done to bring it back to the set point. Uh, as I mentioned, sensory, nervous, endocrine, and circadian systems are effectors. They're both sensors and effectors, and uh, they're the controlling organ systems. All the other systems in the body are controlled systems. So skin and bone and respiratory, cardiovascular, reproductive, urinary, digestive, all those other systems are controlled systems, while sensory, nervous, endocrine, and circadian are the controlling systems. So most of the stuff in the body is done by negative feedback loops. There's homeostasis, something disturbs homeostasis, and a negative feedback loop is going to bring it back to its set point so the body survives another moment, another day, another year. There are sometimes things that body has to do occasionally that requires a large and quick use of large amounts of energy. So you don't want it going on all the time, right? Because it uses so much energy. But sometimes there's a thing that the body needs to do. And in order to do that, it needs to gather a lot of energy. Those kinds of things are rare, but they are accomplished by positive feedback loops. So what is going to happen is, there's a set point for something, and then there's going to be uh, a move away from the set point. That move away from the set point is, yeah, it's going to trigger homeostatic mechanisms and negative feedback loop mechanisms to try to bring it back to the set point, but they're going to be powerless in comparison with all the energy that the body is using in moving that parameter away from the set point. And more it moves away from the set point, more it gets, more energy it takes, it gathers to move even more and even more and even more and even more. So, uh, positive feedback loops move stuff away from their set points. They don't move the set points themselves, they move the parameters, the measures away from the set points in order to accomplish a goal. And once the goal is accomplished, the whole thing stops. All that uh, use of energy to bring stuff away from the set point just stops. And so all those homeostatic negative feedback loops mechanisms that were working in the background, but they were kind of puny. Uh, Now they can go back to work. They can bring that parameter back to its set point after the goal was accomplished. The best known and best studied example of the positive feedback loop is birth or parturition. Uh, Birth, so embryo is developing and becoming a fetus, and after about 9 months, there is time when the fetus itself triggers, like, okay, it's time to go out. It's going to secrete prostaglandins, which is a local signaling molecule. When we study endocrinology, we'll go more into details about these kinds of things. But it has what is called a paracrine effect, which means it is going to be secreted outside of the fetus and is going to affect the cells around it. What are the cells around it? Is the wall of the uterus, which is mostly muscle. Those muscles, when they are triggered by prostaglandins, are going to contract. The contraction is going to push the baby, which is head towards the cervix, is going to push it towards the cervix. That baby's head is going to push against the wall of the uterus right there around the cervix, is going to stretch those muscles there. Those muscles in the wall of the uterus have stretch receptors. Remember the sensor. The sensor is going to then send the information about the stretch to the brain, and the brain is going, integrator is going to process that information, say, oh, birth is starting and there is a stretch in the wall of the uterus muscles. It tells the pituitary to secrete oxytocin, a hormone of the posterior pituitary gland that is secreted into the bloodstream and is carried all around the body, including the uterus. The effect of oxytocin on the muscles of the uterus is to make them uh, contract. So you have a second contraction. And that second contraction is going to push the baby even more, which is going to stretch the uterine muscle wall even more, which is going to send an even stronger signal to the brain, which is going to tell the pituitary to secrete even more oxytocin, which is going to go into the bloodstream and tell the muscles of the uterine wall to contract again, the third contraction. And it goes on and on and on, and it gets stronger and stronger, harder and harder contractions, pushing the baby, and the baby is pushing against the wall of the uterus, and the wall of the uterus is telling the brain to tell the pituitary to secrete even more oxytocin, which is going to make the uterus contract even harder until the baby's out. Once the baby's out, there's no more pressure, there's no more stretch, there's no more signaling to the brain, there's no more telling the pituitary to do anything. There's no more oxytocin in the blood, and the whole thing stops, which means now the negative feedback loops, the homeostatic mechanisms, can bring uterus back to normal. It can ask it to relax, to shrink. It's over. The goal has been accomplished. The baby's out. And so there was a lot of energy building up the process getting harder and harder, stronger and stronger, faster and faster, until the goal is accomplished. And then everything stops, and the negative feedback loops can take over and bring it back to normal. The next thing that's happening is you're putting the baby on the nipple to eat. Now, mom's body is still full of oxytocin. I mean, she just spends a few hours expelling the baby, so oxytocin has not been completely cleared. There's still a lot of oxytocin in mother's body, and the other function of oxytocin is to eject milk. It has nothing to do with the synthesis of milk. That's another hormone. That's prolactin. The milk is already there. And but oxytocin is ejecting the milk out of the breast, and so the baby's hungry, latches on, and there's milk coming out of that nipple. What does the baby do? Gums it up. What does that do? It stretches the stretch receptors in the nipple, which sends the signal to the brain to tell the pituitary to secrete more oxytocin. So the oxytocin tells the breast to eject more milk, which makes the baby happy, and it chomps some more, and chomps and chomps and chomps, and more it chomps, more it tells the brain to secrete more oxytocin from the pituitary, which ejects more milk from the breast until the baby's not hungry anymore and unlatches. The moment it unlatches, nothing is stimulating the stretch receptors in the nipple, so it's not sending the signals to the brain anymore, so the brain is not telling the pituitary to do anything anymore, and so the pituitary stops secreting oxytocin into the bloodstream, so the breast stops ejecting the milk. Continues synthesizing milk, but that's different hormones. So that's another positive feedback loop. It builds up, gets bigger and stronger, uses more and more energy until the goal is reached, and then the whole thing collapses, and the negative feedback loops can finally bring it back to its set point. There are several other positive feedback loops in the body, and we're going to mention some of them as we go through the semester, some of them not. Another one is copulation, where the goal is insemination. So it's the goal is the orgasm in both partners. It works as a positive feedback loop. Another one is micturition, which is peeing. Once you start peeing, the squeezing of the wall of the urinary bladder acts as a positive feedback loop. Once you start peeing, you can't stop. You can't go back. You have to finish. So that's a positive feedback loop. Opening of sodium channels and potassium channels as a part of the action potential in the neuron is something that we're going to study very, very soon. That is also an example of a positive feedback loop. Um, in the blood clotting is a cascade of enzymatic events in which one molecule triggers the formation to the next molecule, which triggers the formation of the next molecule and the next molecule and the next molecule. But each one of those uh, also stimulates the formation of all the previous molecules in the cascade. So it's a positive feedback loop, and it stops once the cut is closed. So there's a plug, and there's no more need for coagulation of blood in, let's say, a cut blood vessel. So that's another example of a positive feedback loop. Ovulation starts as a negative feedback loop, then has a very intense positive feedback loop that results in the ovulation, then goes back to the negative feedback loop. We may go into some details of that, not too detailed when we get to the reproductive system in the end. If you take Bio 169 later on, you will go into much greater detail of how that positive feedback loop works in the ovary. So I think I have just told you all the positive feedback loops that are known in the human body, most mammalian bodies. I mean, I'm sure insects and others might have some others. But that's pretty much it. What is it, like seven, eight, nine examples of positive feedback loops in the body, and everything else is negative feedback loop. Every other aspect of physiology is a negative feedback loop. Only positive feedback loops are those that require a quick, very energy expensive process that leads to a solution, to a goal that solves a problem, and then everything goes back to normal. Positive feedback loops take away parameters away from the set point. They don't move the set point itself.